Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev Podcast. So if so much of what we do in workplace learning doesn't actually change behaviour, why do we keep doing it? When we look at how adults learn in real life versus how most corporate learning is designed, the mismatch is striking. Nick Shackleton-Jones is our wonderfully provocative guest today. He spent years challenging traditional L&D models, assumptions and conventions to help us be better. Nick is the founder of Shackleton Consultant, and he's extremely well known in the corporate learning industry for groundbreaking work and thinking. For example, Nick started a firestorm by coining the phrase resources, not courses. Nick created the 5DI approach to human-centered learning design, which we're really interested to explore today. He began his professional life as a psychology lecturer and working for Siemens, the BBC, BP in roles encompassing learning, strategy, culture change, leadership, innovation, technology and multimedia. He's the winner of several awards for people development strategy, innovation and learning content, including the Learning and Performance Institute's Lifetime Contribution Awards for services to the industry. Nick is also author of the wonderfully accessible and incredibly provocative How People Learn, which is in its second edition, which is brilliant. And he has a fascinating educational background to underpin his experience. He has a BA in psychology and philosophy and also an MA in philosophy, which brings a unique edge to learning that we haven't encountered before. So welcome, Nick. We're really pleased to have you on the podcast.
Well, we're really excited to have you with us. We've got lots of questions for you. And can I just say thank you for your TikTok as well? So I really enjoy your content on TikTok.
Oh, no, you're not supposed to know that. Nobody's supposed to know I exist on TikTok. Yeah.
It's very good. Your musings on corporate life always make me go, oh, God, yes. So it resonates very strongly. Yeah. Yes. So Gary gave us a quick overview of kind of your background. And, can you just kind of expand a bit more on the work that you're doing now, just to bring that to life for us a bit?
I think my last sort of big role was Chief Learning Officer at Deloitte. And I think if you climb the ladder of learning roles, you eventually get into a position where it feels very administrative. And so I think I realized that I didn't want to be sat behind a desk just, doing governance calls all day long. So I now run my own consultancy. I've been doing that for 4 years, do all kinds of stuff, which is basically about making my life adventurous. So I train people on human-centered design. I do a lot of that kind of work for organizations, big organizations and small organizations. And I love meeting different people in different contexts and different cultures. I do design and delivery of leadership programs. So I've just finished designing a blended leadership program, which is a lot of fun, all experiential. I do onboarding programs, help with culture change, diversity and inclusion programs. I thoroughly enjoy the work that I do and actually working with other learning professionals who basically we're all passionate about making a difference. And I think that's what connects us. So yeah, that's what I do.
Fabulous. And you said you described yourself as a corporate annoyance and kind of that kind of being a bit of a revolutionary in the industry and being provocative. What was the first thing that kind of made you start to challenge that kind of traditional training and learning model that's so endemic everywhere?
That's kind of a deep question. I think I might just have been born annoying. There's a serious sort of dimension to that. I've always been the sort of person who wanted to ask these difficult questions. Hence, I went into philosophy. I don't think I asked difficult questions because of the philosophy. I think I went, into philosophy because I wanted to challenge things. I'll give you a story though, because that's a bit dull. When I first joined Siemens Communications, which was my first corporate gig, it was the early days of CD-based learning. And I had this library of CDs from a company called, I think it was Smart Force back in the day, or CBT Learning Systems maybe. And I think they thought I was just going to be like this digital librarian. I was going to be like, hand people a CD and say, there you go wild in your cubicle. But we started doing things differently. I hired a Flash development team. We taught ourselves video skills. And one of the most successful things we did was the sales director said, we want a digital program for salespeople. And I said, well, I don't think people are really enjoying the e-learning modules, or CBT as they were then. Why don't we go around the country and film successful and interesting salespeople and capture their stories? And to give you a sense of how radical this predated YouTube. There was no YouTube. We just started filming people telling their stories and putting them online. People loved that. They love to see their colleagues and hear the stories. And so I've always been looking at something that would work better. And that's, I think, what's driven me.
Fab. And then when you think about some of those misconceptions out there from kind of leaders and people in organisations about how people learn. What are some of the myths you'd like to bust?
The biggest one, the easiest one, is education. Most of what goes wrong in corporate L&D is because the organisation complains that L&D doesn't make any impact, and the learners complain that the learning isn't relevant. And this happens because people are doing education, not learning. And what I mean by that is, if you're an L&D person, you'll often have this feeling that you're just an order taker. And what happens is that the business thinks you're school teachers. Effectively, they think that's what you do. They think they can come to you and say, here's some content, can you put it in a course and get it out to people? And the reality, as many of us know, is that a lot of the learning happens in work. We wish, for example, that leaders would play a more active role in learning and learning culture. But the reason they don't is because I'm not a school teacher. That's the HR team that does all that. So this paradigm, the idea that you're going to take some content, put it in a module, put it in a course, and then it's going to transform behavior, that's why we're still struggling with ROI. Because the truth is, it's not hard to measure ROI. It's just that won't deliver an ROI. If we wanted to make a difference, we'd need to do something different to education, because let's face it, how much algebra do you remember? It's just a demonstrably bad way to impact people. And yet we do it because that's what everybody's come to know as education. So that is the biggest misconception, I think, that learning is education.
When I was looking through your book, you talk about the kind of the pull and the push. So that kind of build resources, not courses. So that kind of shift. So that's one of your kind of tenets, isn't it, of your philosophy, I guess.
It is. There's kind of two things that you can do that will make a difference. So basically, people who learn at work do that because they're pushed by challenges. Very similar to 70-20-10. It's the challenges that you face. And when you hit a challenge, you lean on the resources that you've got. And the resource might be Bob sitting next to you. You're like, hey, Bob, how do I do this? Bob's the resource. But it might also be a checklist. But so there's only really two kinds of things that you can do, push and pull. You can create resources like checklists or guides or AI bots that people pull from, or you can create challenging experiences similar to the ones that people face on the job, like simulations or scenarios, which challenge people and push learning. And you can really only do one of those two things. And the substance for this, or some backup for this, comes from Atul Gawande's book, The Checklist Manifesto, which is why I said resources, not courses. You're going to get a lot more impact on performance in most cases if you just give people useful stuff. Just give people the checklists and the guides and the flow charts that they need to get the job done, instead of trying to put them through weeks of training. So resources, not courses, works for a lot of the time. And then experiences and challenges, when you need to push.
Yeah, and I guess with the resources, something about making them really accessible, isn't there? And not buried in an LMS or a SharePoint site where you can't get to them. So that feels like another challenge we see quite often.
Yeah, it is. It's so ridiculous that we do that. It's like, well, we've created some great resources and we've locked them in a filing cabinet in the basement of an abandoned building, in a lavatory with a poster on the door that says, beware of the cheetah. It's like, oh, how do I get access to these resources? Well, you have to go via a single sign-on. Oh, no, you can't do it on your mobile. And then you have to access the LMS. That's right. And then if you search over here, you have to click that as well. Check the box, sign up. It's like, oh my God, no, that's it. I'm out. I'm not accessing those. So yeah.
One of the things you talked about there was the sort of thing like the use of simulations, for example. And I think you sort of said that a good simulation should make you sweat. What is a simulation, and how would an organization go about using it to sort of accelerate learning? And is a simulation in the easy reach of a typical kind of organization, or does it need a specialist kind of technology or something to make it work?
Super interesting. That quote, by the way, is not mine. It came from Jim Weatherby. He's captained more NASA missions, and I had the privilege of working with him while I was at BP, because BP would hire these kinds of people. And I remember him saying that that's when we knew a simulation was in NASA was good, because it would make you sweat. And if you translate that into my world, what I'm saying about simulations is they have to make your heart race. So, for example, I run a little exercise that only takes 60 seconds. I ran it day before yesterday, called 60-Second Consultant. And I say to a group of people, pick a card. And they pick a card and there's got a topic on it. And you've got to talk about this for 60 seconds. Yeah, and it gets the heart racing. And everybody says, yeah, I'll remember doing that. So what we want to try and do with simulations at work is not make them gratuitous, like, I don't know, build a raft, but actually make them relevant to the job, so that you're practicing something in a way that feels, like literally feels, gives you the same emotional experience, real. And there are some obvious ways to do that, like difficult conversations. Some of the listeners will be doing that already. I think that's great. Practicing difficult conversations, or customer service conversations, or sales negotiations. And so to your question, can organizations do that? Yeah, I think many of them can do it quite easily already, with existing people they've got in the organization. And digitally, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. I use ChatGPT 5, voice mode. You can have really realistic conversations with AI and then get this really accurate feedback about what you did right and what you did wrong. So if people aren't using ChatGPT like that already, they're really missing a trick. So I think there's a whole world that's exciting and opening up there.
And I guess that's quite a nice halfway house, isn't it? Because it's one thing to drive terror into people, that knowing that there's a role play coming up and it will be observed. So that kind of gives people a chance to sort of practice and build the muscle a little bit in sort of a safer learning context, doesn't it?
Yeah, and actually, it's a halfway house. It's a whole load of steps. So there's an organization I work with called Practice Room Online. You can have actors, so you can do it. The shallow end, I guess, is like just practicing with AI, and then you can practice with somebody who's impartial, who's an actor, for example, and then you can do it in a room with your peers, kind of watching. I quite like the last one though, because it does get the heart racing, but also they learn by watching you. I think that's super interesting, is that people who are struggling themselves to manage a difficult conversation will watch how their peers do it and think, oh, that's interesting. I might try and do that. Bit more challenging, but maybe that's a good thing.
And you talked there in terms of like, there's a lot of kind of myths and old paradigms that people carry. And I think I remember you saying that, like, things that we sort of base our very sort of understanding of how learning happens, like the forgetting curve, things like that are actually myths or badly translated science, isn't it?
Yeah. So Ebbinghaus, 1885, famously gave people a list of nonsense. So he called them trigrams, random three-letter things like JFQ or whatever, or BZT. And you had to, he monitored how long it took for people to forget them. And what he discovered was that they forget them very quickly. But, it doesn't show what people think it shows, because what he found was if you force people to repeat them over and over again, they start to remember them, which is why people talk about spaced repetition. But the reality is, if you put some meaningful trigrams in there, like FBI, or even kind of, really emotionally evocative words like stab or something, people would remember those. And all he discovered is that if stuff is meaningless to us, we forget it very quickly. So he proved completely the wrong point, which is, don't force feed people meaningless stuff. Actually find out what is meaningful, because then they'll remember it first time. If you think back to your own life, many of the experiences that stayed with you were one-offs. You don't have to do them over and over and over again. If a tiger attacks you, you don't have to have that happen 10 times in a row. It's like, it's all about the emotional impact, and if you're just using garbage, then you won't learn anything interesting about people.
And I guess there's a risk of more of that, isn't there, with AI, that it's even easier to create dull, meaningless content.
And this is why people complain that they haven't got time for learning. They've got loads of time for learning. The average TikTok user spends 4 hours a day. What they're telling you is that your stuff isn't relevant. It's just boring. It's just, they know they're going to click next. It's not going to relate to the job, and they're going to forget it all, which frankly was how school worked. Well, this is why I say, education is what's sort of slowing us up. That idea that you can just take a bunch of information that doesn't matter to people, put it in a course, they'll click through it, and somehow they'll be transformed by the experience. That doesn't work.
And you've had a fascinating career to date. What has been your sort of journey into the field?
So I started off at a Quaker boarding school, which was a bit Harry Potter. And then I traveled all over the world. Very fortunate. I learned to love different perspectives, hearing from different people, seeing different kind of cultures, thinking about things differently. And then I became a psychology lecturer, published a couple of psychology textbooks. And then the lure of a decent salary took me from, it was pitiful what I was earning as a psychology lecturer. So I went into corporate. I went to the BBC, BBC had lots of creativity, but almost no money. And then I went to BP, who had lots of money, but kind of almost no creativity. But we were able to take all the ideas that we'd had at the BBC and bring them to life. And I'm very grateful to BP for trusting us. We did things that were transformative for the industry, shifting away from e-learning, for example, all these portals that you see, we kind of pioneered that approach. And then that took me into consulting, got to work with some amazing organizations, United Nations, all kinds of people, and do some interesting, wild, experiential stuff as well as really cutting-edge digital stuff. And then I published How People Learn, went to Deloitte, and how now I am where I am today.
Brilliant. That's such a fascinating story. And I guess one of the questions that came up when you were describing that is that really interesting transition from academics into sort of the working world. What was it like to go and was sort of a really good understanding of how learning works, but then to actually see it in the real life about how people were applying it or not? Because you've got fresh eyes, haven't you, when you see that?
I was an idiot. So I thought I was going to change the world because I knew all of the learning theory. Well, I say all, but my head was full of all of these ideas of different learning theories and instructional principles that I could apply that at that time, which was kind of the birth of the internet, nobody was applying. I thought, I'm going to apply, Piaget and Bruner, modes of representation, Vygotsky. I'm going to apply what I'd learned from people like Roger Schank, and it's going to revolutionize online learning. And so we set about doing this, as I say, Harder Flash team. We created stuff which would still look advanced today. And what I learned was that it was completely ineffective. We actually tested this experimentally. We had groups of students use either this e-learning module, which had all of these instructional design principles integrated into it, versus just a text document. And then we said, well, we're going to give you 30 minutes with this and then test you at the end. And they actually scored slightly higher from just reading the text document. And that was a turning point for me, because it stopped me in my tracks and made me think, wow, maybe we just don't understand what's going on at all. And so, at that point, I decided, no, I really have to take a step back and think about how people really learn, which is ultimately what led to me publishing How People Learn.
We're going to ask you some questions a bit more about that in a moment. But I guess the other thing I was sort of interested there is, how do you get the consent, like to go into an organization like BP and say, we're going to do things completely differently? Like, how do you kind of get sort of that buy-in and start to sort of pilot things like that? Because it is countercultural, isn't it?
That's such an interesting question. I love it. So one of the first things is that organizations that want to move quickly need to trust people. And one of the things is that BP was very good at delegating authority. So my delegation of authority was something like $100,000, which means that anything below that spend limit, I don't need consent. I just get on and try it. And that is fantastically enabling. And that reflected the fact that BP was obviously quite cash rich, and not all organizations have the luxury. But the second, perhaps more helpful thing is destination postcards. The HR director at the time at BP was a guy called Helmut. And early on in my career, I went into a meeting with Helmut with a mock-up that I'd created in Photoshop of a BP YouTube that I wanted to create, a best practice sharing platform. I didn't go in with a white paper. I didn't go in with a PowerPoint. I just said, have a look at this. This is what I'd like to build. And this idea of destination postcards, just show somebody a destination they'd really like to go to. That was very effective. And he said, yeah, I love it. I love the idea. Go on and do it. And we did. And the third answer is the obvious one, which many people will know, which is build the relationships, listen to people, make it clear to them that they are heard and that you are reflecting their ambitions, their concerns, their language. So yeah, that was the other technique. Oh, and by the way, there's a sneaky one, which is you don't ask for permission. And we did that a few times, we just go off and do something slightly crazy. And by the time that it had been spotted by, say, the comms team, it was already too big and too successful for people to shut down. So, sometimes that works.
I love that. The destination postcards. Because if you think about how much time is wasted developing papers or the presentation, it's a performance, isn't it? Whereas really it needs to be like a dialogue and a sort of a co-creation almost, doesn't it?
Senior people, as I have been, seem to spend all their time poring over boxes on PowerPoint slides and numbers in rows, and actually just seeing something that is exciting and something which immediately appeals, and you think, yes, that looks good, we want to do that. That works well internally, but also pitching externally. If you're, like I was, a consultant, selling projects, you want to show people what it is that they're going to get for their money. So yeah, that kind of destination postcard is quite powerful.
I guess, and one sort of follow-on question onto that is, the invitation, like you're sort of saying, is really powerful, isn't it? Look, we need some sales training. We need to do this. Can you document this? Can you put a course around this? It's a really strong invitation. What are the ingredients that you need to be able to say, I hear you and I know what you're trying to do, but that's not what we're going to do now? What does your typical garden variety L&D person need to do differently to feel confident to look at it from another angle?
I'm not going to bore you with the details of 5DI, but 5DI is the methodology that answers that question. But the very first thing to do, and this is critical, is you stop your stakeholder from going down the content and topics route. Because once you have done that, that's it. There's no ROI. You're dead in the water. What you want to say to them is, you don't argue with your customer. You say, tell me about the outcome you'd like us to achieve. Because look, you and I, we want to spend the company's money wisely. We want to see a return on investment. So tell me, what would people be thinking and feeling, and most importantly, doing differently if we spend this money on the induction program or the leadership program or, whatever it is, the technical or sales program? And immediately they will start to articulate the outcomes in terms of performance and behaviors. And you won't go down the route of saying, what goes in this course? Well, they need some input on value-based selling or whatever it is, or whatever topic's top of mind. So that's the first thing, is stop talking about content and topics. Start talking about business outcomes right at the beginning. And your stakeholders love that. It's just they haven't been given the opportunity to, because they thought you were school teachers and they thought you wanted to have a list of content and topics. And the second thing, and then I'll stop, is talk to the audience. So when a sales director, I'll give you a real example actually, because it's better. I had a customer service agent training where the business said, we think everybody needs better rapport building skills because we want them to build deeper relationships with customers. And I said, well, yeah, just before we do that, can we go and talk to some of the customer service agents? They've all got brilliant rapport building skills. The issue is that the business penalizes them when they depart from the script. So we were able to go back to the business and say, look, we can save your money, avoid you wasting it. You actually need to look at the systemic issues and the incentives around it, because it's not about rapport building. So the second step is talk to your audience. That's super important.
Yeah, and I guess just a follow-on question from that as well. So you did a really good podcast. There was a Q&A at the end, and someone asked a bit of a naughty question. And I think you sort of said in one of your last roles that you actually stopped hiring L&D people into L&D roles.
Yes.
Because you didn't want to keep deconstructing them and destroying their confidence. Sorry to dig that one up the vault, but it was such an interesting thing. So what is it that L&D people, because I did certificate for training and assessment in Australia, and I lost the will to live. It's literally competency frameworks and trying to bash things into people's heads. What is it that people need, that a modern contemporary L&D person needs to sort of build and add to their skill set or mindset to help them thrive?
Yeah, that's not a naughty question at all. You can ask much naughtier questions. I mean, I'm gonna name names. So as an example, I hired then Gemma Critchley, now Gemma Patterson. Her background was digital marketing, Monsoon, and she was absolutely amazing. She's now head of people and culture, I think, at Lloyds Bank. I hired Kenny Tomowo, who had been as kind of a school teacher, kind of philosopher, musician, hadn't done kind of corporate learning at all, went on to head up people and culture in Netflix in the UK, is now at Shark Ninja. Had Charlie Neen, who'd done events. He did just done events and stuff, and now running his own business. And the beauty of that was they didn't have all these preconceptions that needed to be deconstructed. And I did a piece recently on LinkedIn, which annoyed a whole bunch of people, I think, hopefully in a good way, talking about instructional design and answering your question, which is all of that instructional design stuff is fine for creating educational formats like classroom training or e-learning modules. But actually, you need to develop capabilities in two adjacent disciplines. One is performance consulting, resources, not courses, checklist, manifesto, perform all of that stuff. That makes a big impact. And the other is experience design, creating transformative experiences that, a transformative experience, as an example, can be just a get together, new starters, getting together in a room, meeting other people, no content, no instructional design, massively impacts things like retention and belonging, all this kind of stuff. It's not instructional. And so, I think those are the two dimensions that people need to explore.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarises all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
One of our biggest pet peeves that we have in organisations is just the sheer poor state of onboarding. A lot of effort is brought into bringing people into an organization, and they're kind of inducted, but then they're just left, and it's almost like spinning the roulette wheel just to see if they fit in or fit out, and that individual responsibility then falls on that person. What are organizations getting wrong about onboarding, and what can organizations do to take more responsibility to stack the odds of success in our favor?
I love this. I could spend, honestly, the rest of the day talking about onboarding programs. I've redesigned them. We run the Gold Awards, working with Solved at Deloitte for the redesign of the induction program. And it's so easy to fix them, and it makes such an impact. So the worst onboarding I ever experienced, I was working for, I won't say who it is because I'm not that rude. I was told to sit in a room while somebody read from a script. They weren't even invested in it personally. They were just like, and the next thing and the next thing. And then they wheeled in a TV. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm back at school.
Like a supply
and they were like,
teacher.
Yes. And now we're going to watch this safety video. Hit play. Oh, I can't get it to play. Was the volume like this? Like, oh my God. And it's not surprising that people, it's like, I mean, some of these onboardings, short of actually tasering your new employees as they walk through the building, could not do more to depress their engagement and performance. And actually turning it around is so easy. And just talk to people, for heaven's sakes. We did that at BP and we did that at Deloitte. One young lady, new consultant, said, you know what, I wasted all of my savings on the wrong clothes. And I said, tell me why. And she said, well, you sent me a letter saying we all have to dress professionally. I went out and spent all my savings on professional attire. Day one, I realized that nobody dresses like that. Just find out what new starters struggle with. Systematically interview people who've recently joined and just fix the problems. Checklist is the most popular thing. Super easy, super cheap to develop, but people lose confidence if they don't feel like they know what they're doing. So simple checklists, guides to all the problems. Where to park. I did an onboarding discovery phase for an organization. That was the number one thing. They just need to know where to park on day one. And these sound like little things, but it's all the little things that make such a difference. And then over and above that, I do a lot of emotional curves, looking at, how people experienced onboarding. The single thing that makes all the difference to somebody is having a buddy. Having somebody who is just there to help. Most organizations could completely ditch their onboarding events and replace it with somebody who is just there to help every day, friendly person, maybe AI, and that would have more impact than whatever the heck else it is that they're doing. So, yeah, it is really strange how badly most organizations do onboarding and how easy it would be for them to fix them. But, I'm glad to be in the position of being able to do that.
Often it's, again, in our experience, it's the more senior the role, the worse the onboarding. Yeah. It's almost like there's an expectation that you're capable. We're bringing you in. We've got a whole snagging list of things we want you to get stuck into. Onboarding, you don't need it. Off you go. But the potential for damage to not damage to the organization, but disruption to the organization is huge, isn't it? So again, why is that, and what can be done to sort of smooth and reduce the risk?
So much. And you're absolutely right. And of course, the cost to the organization. So as a real case, I think Deloitte lost on average something like 30% of new joiners within the first 100 days. So that's a key metric. Really simple. We're measuring that, right? So on the pilot we ran, we turned that around and we lost none. I mean, appreciate it was COVID, so there were some confounding factors. That's the sort of business impact that organizations are looking for. You asked what else can be done. Well, in many cases, people are overwhelmed on day one, especially if you're senior. There's just too much information. So why aren't we making some of that available to people when they're really keen to learn and have a bit of time, typically, before they join? And then the other thing that organizations don't understand is that onboarding is a process. Typically, might take 6 months. So why are we crunching all of the program up in this first few weeks? Why don't we have like drop-in sessions and surgeries and, support systems which support people over time? So they're just kind of basic errors, I think, that people make.
You mentioned your 5DI model, so we'll not go into it in detail, but one of the things that interests me is you've made it kind of open source, haven't you? It's free to use. So I'm just interested in the kind of thinking, the philosophy behind that, because often if somebody's developed a model, it's kind of closely guarded and then you have to pay just interested in your thinking there.
Yeah, I hate all that. I think ideas should be free. That's the philosopher in me. I think you should pay for the work and actual experiences, and somebody doing something. My dad is an engineer, and I think that's partly why I think that. But I'm glad that you raised it, that it's open source, because I think otherwise you listen to a podcast like this and you think, oh, here we go, he's going to flog this this model, this thing. And no, it's free. You can download all of the stuff and use it, and you don't need my help at all in many cases. But I think the commercial side of that is you pay for my time and my work and my effort. And so if you do need help, for example, training people up, or you want me to actually use it rather than you use it, then yeah, that's good use of my time. But I suppose the other side of it is, I think if you're too protective around an idea, then that idea is stifled. It doesn't flourish. And I have heard many organizations have just gone off and done it themselves. And I like that. I want to change the world, make a difference. And that's more important to me than protecting IP kind of in that way. So yeah, that's my thinking behind it.
Yeah. And is it evolving as you're more people are exposed to it and using it? Is it shaping how it's developing?
It is. Yeah. It's now I'm preparing the 5th iteration, because I learn about how people are using it and I pick up new things and I get challenged. So I had a client, for example, who said, we're going to use 5DI as the blueprint for our learning organization. And so we need to understand, what does a business case look like? How do we triage different things into kind of different budgets and all this kind of stuff. So many of those things, that thinking, those assets then get flowed into the next version. And then there's more examples of how people have used it, and those go into the next version. So yeah, I find that quite a healthy thing. And it's iteration, which is the I. So yeah, walking the talk, I guess.
What do you enjoy most about the work you do? What really sparks joy or excites you?
Adventure and difference. Adventure and difference. I think meeting different people, hearing different perspectives, different challenges, and the adventure that goes along with that. I on one podcast, I said that, life is lived in adventures, not years. if you, as I discovered in corporate, if you have a very routine life, then time flies by, but you don't have any stories. You have nothing to remember. Whereas what I found is that my own growth is driven by these kinds of challenging experiences. And so I feel that it's a good way to live life, to live adventurously.
Yes. And what's interesting you most in the field when you look at kind of all the things going on? Are there particular things you think that's really interesting? I'm following that as my next thing.
Yeah, I think two directions, and one of those won't surprise people. I think AI is fascinating, so it's terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. And I think there are really interesting and exciting opportunities. And it's barely a day goes by when there's not some radically new kind of AI system or application, or there's a system now where you can just give it a photo and it creates an entire world that you can move around in, which is just mind blowing. And the other side of it is experience design, because I think that people haven't really genuinely begun to think about how to design life-changing experiences. You can have a life-changing experience, right? But if I ask you about them, they're unlikely to be training courses. You can, see somebody get injured in the street and remember that, and it will, change your life. But generally those happen in the wild. We're not very good at getting people in a room and creating an experience which sticks with them for the rest of their lives. And I think we could be. I think we could be able to do that. So I am super excited about life experience design and how we actually transform people.
So do you have a sense of what are the kind of ingredients of creating those experiences that really change people?
I do. And there's also, I'm not the only person wondering about this, is Dan and Chip Heath written a book called something like, I think, The Power of Moments. And they also have some ideas. One of the things is like uncharted territory. So basically people run on rails. In every situation, they behave according to the script. And there was a guy I worked with called Professor Roger Shank, did a lot of work on scripts. But if you put people in a situation that they've never encountered before, you can shape the person that they are. I'll give you an example. The example I sometimes use is people who haven't been in a fight, like a fist fight. They don't really know how they would behave. So they don't really know if they're brave or if they're cowards. But if you create that situation, they find out who they are. And if you create it in the right way, you can shape the way that they behave in future. So there's lots of work, for example, Stanley Milgram, where people learned that actually they will do what they're told. They will kill somebody. And the power, you might think, well, what's the point of that? Well, the power is that once they've done that once, they can become inoculated to that, and it can change them. And the way that I've used this in practice is we started a fight deliberately on a leadership program, which won an award, where the two facilitators, and they were actors, they started arguing right at the beginning. And we did this because we had learned from the analysis that we'd done is that their leaders weren't very good at handling conflict or confrontation or stepping in. So we had the two facilitators kick the session off with a very realistic argument, and nobody did anything. They all sat there afraid. And then we stopped the action and said, how did that make you feel? When did you notice that there was a confrontation? When did somebody cross the line? What should you have done? What would you have done? Now let's do it. And the point of that is you put people in these situations that, where they're not quite sure what to do, and you give them the opportunity then to shape themselves and to become a different person through an encounter with that. So that's just one thing. But I think that the common thing, and I guess you'll both know this, is there has to be an emotional dimension to it. It has to be something that really matters. If you think back your own lives, it doesn't have to be somebody dropping a piano on you. It can just be a comment that really hits you hard. And, those can be powerful as well. So, yeah. A couple of ideas.
Yeah. Which is a whole thing, when you think about emotions, there's still, a lot of organisations are just a bit scared of emotions in the workplace, aren't they? So the kind of framing experiences around creating emotions to help people kind of learn and remember can be a bit countercultural.
Everything in the workplace is emotions. Honestly, I can promise you that. And the problem is that we cover it up. We pretend like it isn't. We almost do this performative, we're just doing this for business reasons, or, but behind this is all of these emotions which are driving decision making. And I think it's important if we want to make decisions well or relate to our colleagues well to actually surface this part of what's really going on, because otherwise it's still emotion. It's just that we're not addressing it. I did this thing that went viral where I said, look, one of the main reasons you're asking to return to the office is because middle-aged men don't get on with their wives. And it's kind of a nice illustration of this principle, because nobody can understand, or many people can't understand, why they're being asked to return to the office when much of the data shows that people are actually more productive at home. And, so there's real estate costs, but the reality is that organizations could lose that overhead. So the question is why? And I am sure, because we did some research into this at Deloitte, that a big part of it is that leaders are uncomfortable at home. They don't feel important. They're being asked to do things where they don't feel very competent, and they don't feel worshipped and respected in quite the same way. So they need everybody else to go back into the office so that they can feel like they've reclaimed their identity, like they know who they are. And I'm sure that that's a big factor. And that's an example of something emotional, which is driving business decisions, which is not being acknowledged or talked about.
We love to post-rationalize things, don't we?
Yes.
As to why things are happening. We were approached by a technology company, sort of specializes in AI. And the intent is good, but it's kind of like the role of ethics in learning as well. And obviously being a person who's sort of studied philosophy, part of what they were sort of proposing is that a lot of people that are promoted into management positions sometimes can be highly technical, but find the empathy element more challenging. It doesn't come naturally. And so they would be participating in a meeting, and on a little display, it would be sort of predicting what emotions others were having, and therefore helping them guide with responses as well. So again, with AI, we're sort of moving into sort of grayer areas. What is the role of ethics in learning? Or is it more about achieving results more than anything?
As you go, I'm going to need your boots, your sunglasses, your motorbike, like the Terminator kind of, yeah. It's funny you should say that. I had a very similar conversation with a chief learning officer, and I was talking about some of the concerns I had about AI coaches, because I'm seeing a lot of AI coaching, and in one way it's a good thing. But I said, my worry is that leaders will think, well, the AI is doing that now, so I don't have to do that anymore. And she said, and what's wrong with that? And that stopped me in my tracks and made me think, because I have this kind of instinctive reaction that leaders ought to be able to coach, that's part of what we expect of leaders. But if that starts to get outsourced, where does it stop? What do we stop outsourcing? Because the reality is, I spend a lot of time teaching leaders the basics. To your point, they're not very good at the people stuff. So I teach them skills around getting to know the people in your team, how to relate to them, how to flex your style. But the truth is that AI could do that infinitely better. And so maybe we'll see that leadership are being replaced by AI very rapidly. And so you asked about ethics. And I think the ethics question ultimately is a pretty deep one. I don't know how far you want to kind of go, but all AI systems are inherently unethical because they don't care. They give the appearance of caring, but they do not in fact care because they don't feel the way that we do, and they're not grown in the same way that we are. And so there is a worry, I think, that people will continue to put profits before people until they start to put people before profits. So I think we could talk a lot about ethics and the ethics of AI, I guess, but I'm very troubled by it because, as I say, I think, AI is always a smiling psychopath. At some point, somebody like Elon Musk is going to stick AI in a robot and put it in your house, and it will smile at you and it will cook your meals. But my advice would be make sure that it's locked up at night.
I guess the thing, isn't it, we could be potentially sleepwalking into things, couldn't we? And, it would be easy to be managed by an algorithm as well, in terms of sort of keeping us on course and whatnot too. So it's about having those like conversations. I guess the big question is where do we have those conversations? Is this a conversation that happens in the L&D team? Is this a conversation that happens broader than?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that L&D teams need to seize the advantage, because what's happening at the moment is the business is in pursuit of performance and profits. And the L&D team are inclined to look at AI and say, well, that's kind of tech stuff. That's nothing to do with us. That's the IT team. And if we don't step in and take the initiative, I think the IT team will pick up the introduction of, for example, AI guidance systems or, AI buddies. And before we know it, it won't look like there's anything left for us to do. And I think that would be a shame.
We asked you what you enjoyed most about your work. What do you find most challenging on the flip side?
Bureaucracy. I'm terrible at it. And it frustrates me because I always look for a better way to do things. And when I can see a way of doing things that's incredibly inefficient and nonsensical, then I have some sort of meltdown, and I have to be calmed down. Admin, bureaucracy, nonsensical stuff.
And when you look back at your career so far, what are the biggest lessons that you've learned and you take forward? It's a big question, but you can pick 2 or 3.
I think, as I say, one of the biggest lessons that I learned early on was that the instructional design, doesn't really help you in the real world. And I know that will possibly offend lots of people, but here's the thing. Why is it that our customers are actively avoiding instructional design? Why is it that all of the formats that they really like and choose, whether that's TikTok or even just reading a book or talking to people, have 0 instructional design? Can it not give us pause for thought and say, actually, maybe we need to kind of rethink and look at what people are finding effective for learning, rather than try to impose things on them and tell them that this is more effective for learning? That was a big shock to me, I think, early on. That was sort of mid-20s, I think. And then other things was just an awareness that, especially in a sales role, of the way that the difference between seeing the answer and persuading people to accept the answer is a big one. It's not enough just to say, hey, I can see a better way of doing this thing. You have to really build relationships. It's like taking somebody to the top of the mountain. It's not enough to sort of storm through their front door and say, right, we're going to the top of the mountain over there. You have to, take them by the hand. You have to reassure them. You have to go at their pace. You can't let go of them at any point, or they'll just kind of head home. And actually, I've learned a lot of lessons around how important it is to think about, I guess, the human side of change.
And someone who spends so much of their life giving in terms of helping others with their learning and development, how do you invest in your own?
2 directions, and they reflect what I've been saying. I'm chronically online. I spend a disturbing amount of time saying things on TikTok and LinkedIn, and then looking and responding to comments, because I find the conversation, it helps me to take different viewpoints, to understand where people are coming from. And so online conversations through, as I say, TikTok and LinkedIn. And the other side of things is through travel and through the work that I do, where I'm constantly challenged in different ways. And so my learning tends to come from those 2 directions. I do a little bit of reading, but less so, because I find that I can just learn more rapidly through formats like TikTok.
And when you think of resources, is there a particular book or a podcast or something else that you'd recommend that people follow up and take a look at?
Good question. Well, I mean, obviously, Checklist Manifesto, one of my kind of favorites. I think Dan and Chip Heath's work on the power of moments is really good. If you're thinking about kind of experience design, it really kind of gets you going. I think you start to think about that. So those 2 directions. Podcasts, all kinds of things. I like to read around a topic. So Sam Harris is kind of making sense with Sam Harris is an obvious one. And then, as I say, I'm not on commission from TikTok, but following interesting people and getting diverse perspectives. There's a guy called Nate B. Jones, for example, who is an absolute guru on all things AI. And in case you think, well, TikTok sounds a bit dubious, the way I use it is I track interesting things like research and AI developments. And if something looks interesting, I'll then follow the link and go off and look at the original research or, the paper or the book or whatever. So yeah, it just is like a nice little signposting device.
And then the final question from us is, what advice would you give someone considering a career where learning is an element of it? So whether they're going into learning and development or organization development, and then it'll be an element of it. What advice would you give to someone?
Yeah, I guess I would say, don't, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you tend to project yourself into the advice you give to others. So as somebody who's spent a career kind of challenging things, I'm sort of hesitant to say challenge things, because the truth is it won't always make for an easy life, and you'll probably end up like me, like a bit of an annoyance. But I mean, that's one thing, is it's good to just sort of challenge not everything that you hear. I think a lot of what you hear in L&D is just made up stuff. Like learning styles is an obvious one, or Kolb, all these sorts of things. And then the other advice I would say is have a look at either performance consulting or experience design as directions, because they've got both really powerful ways to influence people or business outcomes. And I think if you just stay in your lane and you just end up doing education, you will quite quickly reach the point where you feel like an order taker. And I hear a lot of people say this, is they've spent a few years in learning and they just feel like they're being asked to put some stuff in a course, and they've lost faith that it's making a difference. Try and avoid, the first thing is challenge people, which has been my own trajectory. And there is a risk that you end up just being a bit of an annoyance, but it makes for an interesting life. If on the other hand, you decide just to stay in your lane, there is a real risk that you end up feeling like an order taker and you're doing stuff that isn't making a difference. And that can be very demoralizing. So my advice would be to look at these adjacent disciplines, which are performance consulting, which can really help people to do the job. And it's very rewarding when you do it well. And the other is experience design, which is so much more creative. Kenny and I had people sitting in ball pits. It doesn't have to do with content or instruction. It's about transformative experiences. They don't all have to be extreme. Some of them are just kind of very practical things, but it's so much more room, especially in a digital world, for growth. And so I would say those two are interesting and exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. It's been a really good conversation. We've really enjoyed it as well. It's been so many insights and things, and we haven't even had time to share and explore your deep love of competency frameworks.
Yeah. But the listeners have been spared that.
Danny, what are you taking away from the conversation?
I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lovely conversation full of kind of provocation and kind of just food for thought, and some kind of that blend of really practical tools and ideas and techniques that I think people are going to take a lot away from it. So, I love the idea of using, ChatGPT voice mode to practice difficult conversations, or, the destination postcard. I think that kind of really visual, kind of really helping people visualize where you're trying to get to. Lots and stop focusing on the content and the topics and reframe and get people thinking about business outcomes.
Brilliant. Yeah. And for me, echo with the destination postcards as well. The one phrase you said at the beginning, which I thought was really great advice for all companies, is that organizations that want to go fast have to trust their people. I think sometimes people forget and put more controls and processes and procedures in place that holds that back. Love what you were saying in terms of onboarding. It's such a overlooked but absolutely essential component of really having a high performance organization as well. And I just love the challenge to the L&D profession, which is, if you're seeing yourself as an order taker, there's almost like an obligation to challenge yourself to do better and do it differently as well. So thank you so much. Nick, if people want to follow your work, you have some brilliant content out there. What is the best place for people to follow your work, read your book? And those things will be in the show notes as well.
Well, I mean, at the moment, the thing is, it's harder for them to avoid me. So I think I pop up on LinkedIn quite a lot. That's probably the easiest place. There's a website, Shackleton Consulting, with videos and stuff and the toolkit on it. I'm not on Twitter so much. I am on TikTok, but you really shouldn't watch that stuff. So that, I think, is how you find me.
Well, thank you, Nick. And thank you just on behalf of the profession for being so generous in the way that you think and sharing your best thoughts and your resources for so many to share as well. We really appreciate it. If you are watching this podcast, one of the things we love about the stats is just the number of shares that happen every single week. So if you're watching this and you know a disillusioned L&E person or a manager that knows that they can equip their teams in a better way, please do share this podcast. There's so much value that Nick has shared today as well. And also hit the like button as well, because the algorithm gods love it too as well. But most importantly, thank you so much for your time, Nick. Thank you for making time on a busy Friday afternoon for us. We really appreciate it. It's a great episode.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. I have. It's been great to talk to you both.
We've really enjoyed it.